Hi, Adam. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for having me today. It's really an honor.
It's an honor for us. I'm thrilled to have you. I'm honored that you're sharing your story with us. It's a story that has already helped thousands of people, and I'd love to hear that story. I'd love to start with the moment you shared with me that you felt like your life changed.
You know what? And it just so happened to be in a unique place. It was in a patrol car, in a police patrol car, in the front seat, not the back seat. And I was a uniformed law enforcement officer. And this particular day was unique in the fact that I live in the Bible Belt in Deep South Alabama. And so my family was in church. I was working, and I felt incredibly hopeless and helpless and quite frankly trapped. I had felt for a very long time that I would be better off had I never been born, and others would be better off if I were not here. And so I pulled out my sidearm and I stopped about right here. And I think that's one of the greatest miracles of my life. One of them was a miracle of a pause right here. And I grew up in church, but I was on this kind of trying to understand more about faith and God. And so I just kind of yelled at God. I called on him and I said, I don't know if you have a plan for my life or purpose, but if you do, you can have it. Otherwise, I'm done. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of fighting. I've hurt since I was a kid, and I'm done. And I'm sure that there's a physiological or a biological or even a psychological explanation for what happened in the car. But I felt a complete perfect peace. If you've ever seen a lake first thing in the morning when the water looks like glass, it went from white capping to glass. And I've never been able to duplicate that in any other way, just carry it here and try to share it through my words. And I felt a love that felt like a perfect embrace. If you've ever hugged somebody and they embraced you and you felt the genuine love and care that they have for you, multiply it times 1,000 or 10,000. It was absolutely perfect. That love, whatever that was, and I believe it was an encounter with God. I don't really have a complete understanding other than I believe it was an encounter with God, because I wasn't on any drugs. I was at the end of my rope. And so things began to change. And we could talk more about that, but that was a day that my life changed forever. And a few months later, I would go on to leave law enforcement, and here we are today.
I think most of us have had an experience in various degrees of falling to our knees, right? Like that experience of just feeling like you're giving up, feeling like it's all too much. And It's so important for us to have these conversations so we feel less alone. Can you share a little bit about your past and what led you to that moment?
It started when I was a little boy. As a little boy, my mom and dad divorced, and I was left with a babysitter who was an older male, non-relative. I started off pretty normal, and then it turned into him introducing me to pornography and then sexual abuse, and we'll just leave it at that. And then my mom remarried, so I started going to church like 13 days a week because she remarried a preacher, so we were going to church all the time. And most of the messages were, if you do this, you go to hell. If you don't do this, you go to hell. But the encounter I had in the patrol car was nothing like that. It was like, there's nothing you can do to change my love for you, and I think that's beautiful. But that would happen again when I was 15. I was left with a babysitter who was a leader in the church, an adult married woman who had children and a leader in the church, and a lot of deception and manipulation. And that lasted for a while, and then I got out of that and met this beautiful young lady in my senior year of high school, and we got married about 5 months after we graduated high school, and we've been married this year 24 years. We have 3 children. Got into law enforcement a few years later, and started drinking pretty heavy. I felt like that I had dealt with all the stuff from my childhood, but that's really heavy stuff. I mean, I know that I'm brushing over it because I want to be careful, but I know that is heavy, and I know that I'm not the only one that's dealt with this stuff. So if you're listening to this or if you're watching this, the forgiveness or lack thereof on my part, or bitterness and resentment and hate, because it was really a lot of hate that had built up over time, I tried to deal with it. And it's funny because it's not funny, but it's, I guess, ironic that I would drink to numb what I felt. And then when I got to the point I was numb, I drank so I could just feel again. And because it got to the point I didn't feel. And that's sort of, I got to a place where I was just this really hard-hearted, cynical jerk. That's just a really nice way to put how bad I was. And I'm not self-shaming or any of this. It's just the reality of who I was. I became very distant and cold. I remember one day I came home from my shift, and I took off my vest and my duty belt, and I sat down in the recliner, and I stared at a blank TV screen, and my wife was standing behind me. You got to understand, I married her because I love her. I still love her. I married her because I wanted to spend the rest of my life until death do us part, my best friend. And so for me to be in this place, when I think about it, I have to pinch my fingers so I don't get emotional because I think about how much that she's loved me and how much love she's shown me and how much grace she's shown me. And then that particular day, she said, "Hey, babe, how was your day?" In the sweetest, kindest voice. And my response should have been different than what it was. It was not fair to her the way I responded because she didn't know what I'd gone through that day. And I responded with one word, and it was just cold, and it was dry, and it was fine. That was the word, fine. And it was just the tone more than really anything. But I had dealt with a suicide. I had dealt with a child sexual abuse case, and on top of some other issues. And it just took everything I had to get home, like emotionally and mentally. And I know that kind of makes me sound weak, but it's the reality of being a human being. And I did. And so when I responded that way with that tone, it led to a verbal argument, and I did what I knew how to do best, either hide it, mask it, or run. And so I packed my bags and I ran, which a few days later, the patrol car accident would happen. And, my past has been it's been wrapped with pain. And that day in the patrol car, something happened. And for me, it was either I'm going to let this destroy me or I'm going to use it to change lives, first of all, mine and my marriage, and be there for my family. And then it became something more powerful that just kind of kept building. And I've gone on to write multiple books and have multiple bestsellers and see transformation in lives across the country and in places around the world, really. And I've played really small and timid because of being raised in the Bible Belt. But I think this is time to change, because hope is not meant to be small. And so that's a little bit about, I'm trying to keep it very, I guess, level and not go into the weeds, so to speak. But there was a lot of pain. And here's the thing. I think a lot of people can relate to some of these places where I've been, whether it's childhood abuse, unforgiveness, and bitterness, and the hate that kind of develops as a result of that, and then becoming somebody that you never wanted to be. And now I have joy again. Now I live with peace, and I'm thankful for it. I thank God for it.
I want to hear more about how you got to that place. But first, in the last few years, probably the last 10 years, I've had the chance to speak to more people in the military, veterans, police officers, never expecting that tapping would touch so many people's lives. And I could not believe how little I knew, how little I understood of what the day-to-day is, the sacrifices that are made. And I think the hardest part is often the loneliness that comes when you're dealing with so much. You're being faced with so many difficult situations that it's hard to share with other people. Speaking to Sam Sonnet, she said that one time she went to a therapist and she could see her therapist feel traumatized by all of the things that she said that she was experiencing. And I would love you to speak to that for those who can resonate with those like me who don't understand what it's like, but to put a light on what it's like to be someone of service either military, in the police, a firefighter, really what goes on and what you have to face and how that impacts you?
Some days most of the time it's boredom. And I heard somebody put it this way. There was like, it's like 99% absolute boredom with 1% sheer terror. And I would say for me, you encounter people who are dealing with some of the worst pain known to humanity, because you meet them at a place that is very personal and they really want it to be very private, but it's a situation that calls for your help. And so to be compassionate, it's almost like you have to put on a show, because here's the reality. Most cops, and firefighters too, but most law enforcement officers are not compensated very well. Not all, but most. And so in the back of their mind, a lot of times it's, how am I going to pay this bill or take care of this expense or do this? Or, I mean, there's these things, just normal everyday things that a lot of people deal with. And then if there's marital disagreement or marital conflict in any manner, which is why I wrote the book on marriage, it's that weighs heavy on your mind. So all these things serve as distractions. You got to bottle them up, put them in a box, and shove them to the corner so that you can go focus on your job, because the reality is you do not know if you're going to make it home. You leave with that goal in mind, but the world that we live in, it is not guaranteed. And so you depend on your training, on your mindset, on being able to be focused and have a lot of clarity, to be able to communicate and de-escalate as much as possible. But the reality is that there's a lot of pain that you deal with. You see people that have loved each other their entire lives trying to destroy each other because of power, control, or whatever the case may be. You see pure evil in its purest form, really, in violence and the things that people do across this country. You see a lot of pain. I saw that. I dealt with it. Not as much as others, but I did. And that weighs on you. You go home, you look, if you have children, you look at your children, you think, man, I don't want them to deal with this. I don't want them to know anything about this. But it carries over to every area of your life. For law enforcement, which was my experience, was there's particular places I would not go. There's particular places I would sit when I go out somewhere. There's particular things that I would do and plans that you have to have in place. And and that's the reality of where we live today and the world we live in, but it shouldn't be that way, but it is. And so you have to be protective. I'm protective. You have to be prudent and wise and have these strategies in place. But I mean, for me, it was as simple as passing a building where something had happened, and I'd be going out to eat with my family. And then I'd go from being talkative and happy and light to quiet, because that was kind of like my way of processing things, which is not necessarily a healthy thing to do. And so you could call it triggered, or you could call it whatever. I don't know what you want to call it, but I would just get really quiet and kind of shut down, which would ruin the whole deal. Memories of dinners and birthdays and different events are kind of tarnished in places because of how I was processing things. And if I could give one tool or one strategy or one resource to help a first responder or anybody for that matter deal with overcoming those moments so they could have the joy in the moment and be present in the moment, it's worth it. That stuff weighs heavy on you. I remember one particular case. I was not an agent in charge. I was nothing special. I was like a dooflunky, but it involved a little boy in a bunker who was a hostage. And I remember going home at the end of my shift one night. It lasted a week. It was a week-long hostage deal. It got national attention. And I remember going home one night and waking up in the middle of the night, and my side of the bed was completely drenched with sweat. I know that sounds absolutely disgusting, but I had never experienced anything like that before in my life, and it absolutely freaked me out, freaked my wife out. She didn't understand. I didn't understand. Horrible, horrible nightmares. And so I think a lot of times the reasons why maybe we don't sleep as well is because we're afraid of dealing with those nightmares again because of how they make us feel. And so the reality is pain begets pain if we don't have strategies to deal with it. If we don't have a plan in place on how we're going to respond to it, because the fact is we can't do anything about the pain that has occurred in the past. There's nothing we can do to change the past, but we can change how we respond to it. At least for me, that's been my philosophy, and that's been how I've tried to address the things from my life and my experiences. And so understanding that, number one, you have a specific set of skills. You have a particular purpose in this life as a first responder to serve your community with excellence and with pride. It's a noble and worthy profession in any walk of a first responder. And America needs you, our communities need you, and we're grateful for you. And we focus on the men and women who do their job well and with excellence and with purity in heart. And at the same time, we understand that that comes at a cost. They miss birthdays, they miss anniversaries, they miss celebrations, they miss holidays, and they do it and they understand it, but it's still hard. It's still hard on the spouses and on the children. And so I could go on and on and on. So there's a lot of pain, and how do we respond to that pain? And so tapping, my last year of law enforcement, I was introduced to tapping by a dear friend. If you're a law enforcement officer, you have all these tools on your belt. If you're a firefighter, you have all these tools at your disposal. Tapping was a tool that I put in my belt, and I have been able to use for nearly a decade now to help me kind of navigate some of these issues. And it's deepened my faith tremendously, and it has given me a degree of freedom and emotions and thought patterns that alcohol never could touch. But it's helped me to be able to deepen my faith in ways that, it's been incredible for me.
I'm curious your first experience with tapping, or the first time you thought, wow, this does deserve to be a tool on my tool belt.
Yeah. I think I took a really deep breath afterwards. I know that's not, flashy, but it was just like, wow, I can feel like this. I've gone my whole life with certain people in my life that were really close to me that refused to validate the pain that I went through. And therefore they never wanted to be a part of my healing. And here I am, I'm finding a path to healing. I'm finding a path to freedom. And once you don't understand what's under the surface of the pain that you've kind of pushing down. Like right now you think that I'm just pushing down and suppressing and hiding all of this pain and all of this trouble and all of these heartaches and all this stuff. But underneath all of that is new life. And so when you find the courage to say, I'm going to let this go and I'm going to bring it to the surface and deal with it, out from under that comes new life. And so you don't know what's buried underneath that, the goodness that you have down inside of you. I know that you carry pain. Some people do. I did. Maybe I'm the only one, but so a lot of people do. And once you release that, in my experience, it was a lot of really good things that came out of that. And now I know that there's people that, and especially my work, where I'm at in the Bible Belt, that they don't understand it or they disagree with it. But here's the deal. It's not alcohol. It's not a pill. And it helped me, and it's helped a lot of my friends. And I'm no longer, who am I to be a gatekeeper to it? I've kind of kept it a secret for nearly 10 years. So I think it's time to introduce people to it and introduce them to a way, hey, if you're dealing with anxiety, it's helped a lot of people in my family. If you're dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with past trauma, if you're dealing with these things, it's a tool. It's a phenomenal, effective tool that has been beneficial to me. And so my first experience, when I was told about it, I said, that's some voodoo stuff, and I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm like, you've lost your mind. Like, I don't understand this. And then when I started exploring it and really researching it, which is one of the most researched tools that we use today, and it's, got a lot of solid support behind it. I tried it, and it has been phenomenal. And so my first experience afterward was just like, wow, just a sigh of relief. Like, for me, the thing that keeps me from experiencing miracles most often is between my ears, because I'm super analytical, and I need to look at facts and evidence. And so when I got to the place to where I started trying this, it removed those blocks, if you will, and it got me to a place to where I could believe at a deeper level and believe in and believe in what's possible. It's removed a lot of things like, the resentment. But it's helped me to go deeper in my faith. I think that's the beautiful thing for me. If you're a person of faith, and you've never tried this, it will absolutely do wonders for you. It will do wonders for you, because we all deal with doubt. If there's a person that literally walked alongside Jesus, and we can read that in Scripture, that doubted, it's okay if you have it too. It's okay if you have fear too, but don't live with it and don't let it control you, because there's a miraculous, beautiful life for you if you're willing to walk into it. If pain is real, imagine what's on the other side of healing.
Adam, you shared earlier that moment in the car, and what I would love to hear is a bit about the healing journey, because we have those moments when you feel the grace of God, where you feel like more, or hope. You feel hope. And still there's a path. It's not, I imagine that it wasn't that you had that experience in the car that you felt loved and you were like, oh, okay, I'm done, I'm healed, my life is perfect. You still had to walk that path. Can you tell us about that healing path?
Yes. It is my belief that I had an encounter with God in the patrol car. I know, some have labeled me crazy, but that's okay. I'm still here. I didn't pull the trigger. I believe I had that encounter, but I still had to make behavior changes on the inside of you. I know that maybe if you're listening to this, maybe you've read some of my books and you found this interview, or you've heard me speak at an event, or whatever the case is, and maybe you're still kind of cynical about different things. On the other side of that is great compassion. And for me, it required me to learn to start being a little bit more compassionate with myself, and just come to be brutally honest about where I was and how I got there and what I was dealing with, no matter how bad it hurt, because I've got this whole track record of being really good at hiding pain or suppressing it or pretending it doesn't exist. From that day forward, I had to begin making some changes. And so instead of going home and drinking really heavy at night, I began to write. I remember that day after the patrol car, I went and found my wife. I called her, I found her, and her first words were it was a big smile. And she said, just come home. Just come home. And I want to tell you, growing up in church, I heard people talk all the time about heaven and hell and love, and it's different when you experience it. Pain, for me, it kept me from experiencing how God wanted to use other people to love me. And he sent this beautiful woman into my life to love me, to reflect his love for me in a really beautiful way. And so for me to move forward, it required me to make some behavior changes, to take responsibility, to not blame it all on the pain or blame it all on my past or whatever, to say, okay, I have been this way. We can accept responsibility and then dive into the roots of what caused it, okay? I want to go into the roots. As my friend Tim, who introduced me to tapping, he was like, we got to get to the roots. We got to get to the roots of what caused this. And so I did, and that was part of the journey. So healing is not like this clean travel line like this. It's like this wild ride like this. And most often it's progressive in nature, meaning it's going to take time and increments. And so that's kind of like my journey. Writing became a very therapeutic part of my journey. And then one day I felt like I'm supposed to write a book, and I kind of wrestled with that idea. And here we are, like a few years later, and 170,000 people have read my books, and that's really cool. My healing journey was like becoming really intentional with being aware of what I was thinking and what I was feeling, because I never dealt with that. And so it's been a journey. The healing journey all by itself is an adventure. And if you think pain is an adventure, healing is a really cool adventure that you're going to love. It's beautiful. But it's not linear. Don't expect it to be like, I had this experience today and now everything is just sunshine and rainbows. They expect the sort of ebbs and flows, the mountains and the valleys, but have a plan to come out of the valley. And because you're going to have those days, it's part of being a human being. And I still have them myself, but I have a plan, I have tools, I have a strategy on how to come out of those. And it's kind of the rhythms of life, and understanding those rhythms. And so I think that's one of the key things for healing is understanding the rhythms. When you're tired, it's not just throw everything away and burn everything to the ground, it's go rest. And so for me, I would get to the place where I would get really quiet, because I want to process all this stuff, and then I would get caught in these loops. You can get caught just thinking and dwelling on things And our minds can be either a very beautiful place or it can be a place that is a nightmarish playground. And so I choose to make it a place that's beautiful. And healing for me meant reaching out and talking to different people, finding people that I could trust and confide in. My wife has been the number one supporter, kind of like behind the scenes. She doesn't want to be on camera or on a stage, but she's there, and she is as much a part of this as I am, and she has been a rock. You know, I like to tell people, if you think anything about me is strong because of my story or because of what I've done, I wish you could meet her. And then I've had so many people be a part of my life that have contributed. You'll never hear me say I'm a self-made man, but just having people in my life that God has put there to love me and to lead me and to just sometimes just be somebody to listen, you know? And so having and a lot of them were just like these divine relationships that he brought into my life and coordinated. And I'm so thankful to think that where I am today and where I've come from and where I'm heading compared to where I could have been. And I think it's a beautiful journey. It's one worth taking.
It makes me think of this quote, which I'll paraphrase because I don't have it perfectly memorized, but it's Rumi, and it's, your task is not to seek love, but to seek out the barriers that you've built against it.
Yes.
And I love what you said about this love all around you, that God is loving you through people, that there's this universal love, that there's so much love around us. And if we don't feel like it's there, maybe we don't have that clear, the wife, that partner, but this idea of, if we begin to do the work to clear our blocks and realize that we do deserve love and that we are enough and that we are worthy, we begin to see it. We begin to feel it in ways that we were blind to it before.
Yep. Well, beautifully said. And I've heard that quote. I love that quote. And I feel like that for me, pain of any kind, I put all that ugly stuff into a box and call it pain, or trauma, whatever you want to call it, became something to block me from what was available for me through love. Love is the most beautiful thing. It's the most powerful force in the entire world. And pain comes along to keep us from experiencing that in the purest forms. And when we understand that pain or trauma or our past experiences, they can either be a place where, well, that's where my dreams died. That's where my destiny was killed. That's where my purpose was destroyed. Or it can become a launching pad where you're launched into your destiny, where you're launched into your purpose, where you're launched into a greater future, where you experience love at its purest form. And I'll tell you, this is why I say this. This is why I talk about it so much. And I know that I sound like a redneck hippie, but it's so important because I know I'm not the only person that has felt completely hopeless. I know I'm not the only person that's felt completely helpless. And I know that makes me very vulnerable to a lot of criticism, but it's worth saying because I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one that's felt I'd be better off if I weren't here. I know I'm not the only one that thinks or has thought that others would be better off if I weren't here. And so that all comes from a place of pain. But when love enters the picture, love covers a multitude of sins. Love covers a multitude of pain. And love is the ultimate healing salve for our deepest wounds. And in my deepest pain, the thing I needed most was kindness. And oftentimes our pain keeps us to a place where we're shut down and closed off to experiencing it and recognizing it. And so I would say to you today that if you have someone in your life that you deeply love and they're going through pain, be relentlessly kind to them. Be gentle and compassionate. I love to look at the example of what Jesus did in the New Testament, and he was compassionate. He was compassionate to people when they were hurting and when they needed a miracle. You know, anytime that they needed a miracle, he was compassionate. And I feel like if we were to just kind of model that, to be compassionate and loving towards people around us, forgiving the two people who hurt me and the people who condoned it and dealt with and sort of tolerated it and swept it under the rug, that was hard. It took me a long time to deal with that. But the hardest person I've ever forgiven was the one in the mirror. because we know every secret, we know every detail, we know every motive, we know every thought. And oftentimes we hold ourselves to this really high standard, and we're not very compassionate towards ourselves. And so we know that we're supposed to love others as we love ourselves. But most of us don't love ourselves very well. And I don't mean this in like this conceited, nasty, egotistical thing. I mean this in a very clean, healthy, pure love. Like you love yourself enough to take care of yourself. And how is it that we could possibly love a spouse, a friend, a family member, a complete stranger, someone else is hurting, if we don't first take time to love the one that is right here? And so the hardest thing I've ever done wasn't forgive people who sexually abused me or traumatized me. It was the one in the mirror. It's the one in the mirror who hurt the people that was around me because of how I responded to pain. Never abused them. I was just isolated, which is, I guess, a form of abuse. And being willing to own what you've done and make changes going forward. We can't change the past, but we can respond differently going forward. And I choose to respond with love, because I promise you, we can do more in this world if we lock arms and go shoulder to shoulder. We can do more in this world when we're motivated to love those behind us, beside us, and in front of us than we ever could with hate.
Amen.
And that's not a popular message, but it will change the world.
It really will. And your work is changing the world. And I'm so grateful that you shared your heart with us, you shared your story with us, and that you're going to be part of the Tapping Solution app, and that we can continue to create
awesome?
tapping meditations to support first responders and those who need it the most. So I really appreciate you, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm looking forward to it.